At around 7:30 p.m. on November the 1st of 2023, an unnamed woman was recorded running up to a plane that was on the runway at Canberra Airport in Australia. Alarms blared as she walked up to the stationary Qantas Link plane and seemingly tried to wave down the pilots. Unconfirmed reports indicated that she'd missed her flight but decided to try and catch it anyway by pushing past staff at the boarding gate and then leaving the terminal through an emergency exit. The clip showed the woman, who was wearing slippers and holding her phone, standing directly beneath the plane next to its front wheel. Fortunately, the pilot stopped the engine, either after spotting her or being warned about her. The flight was delayed until the woman was arrested inside the terminal, and she remained in custody. As of the latest updates, former Qantas pilot Richard de Crespigny spoke about the incident to 9 News Australia and described it as something he hadn't experienced in 45 years of flying. De Crespigny noted that it takes an extreme attitude to do what the woman had done. He also spoke about the dangers to which she'd exposed herself, including being run over, crushed by high-pressure hydraulics, or sucked into the A380's engine if she came within 26 feet or less of it. Number 7. Jeffrey Rouse. Florida man Jeffrey Rouse, aged 40, was arrested following a high-speed chase in the summer of 2020 after he'd previously been recorded threatening and spewing racial abuse at a woman in traffic. Rouse and the victim, who was identified as Mishu, were both stopped at a red light in Naples on the evening of August the 13th. Mishu recorded the man, who shouted at her, "How much do you think your life matters right now?" before calling her the N-word multiple times and threatening her with mace. Seemingly oblivious to the consequences of his actions, he encouraged the victim to post the video on her social media. The clip went viral on Twitter, at which point more victims came forward to report similar encounters with Rouse. Naples resident Yaritza Gary recognized Rouse as the individual she'd seen verbally attacking an elderly black man earlier in the month. Gary told Fox 4 the guy was yelling the N-word and saying, like, to say something, trying to do something. Watch what'll happen to you. Gary's brother reportedly tried to intervene, but Rouse called him slurs as well. ICU nurse Dominique Peterson also detailed an incident in which she and a colleague had been victims of Rouse's racially charged tirades. Rouse, who reportedly worked as a delivery driver for Grubhub, was tracked down by deputies within days of the traffic incident. He led the authorities on a 100-mile-per-hour car chase through Collier County before barricading himself in his home. He was ultimately arrested without further incident. As of the latest updates on the matter, the authorities hadn't disclosed Rouse's charges, but noted that they would likely be met with hate crime enhancements. Number 6. Caroline Werner. Brazilian model Caroline Werner went to walk her dogs on a beach in Balneário Camboriú, a coastal city in the country's south, in May of 2023. As she returned to a street parallel to the beach, Werner decided to take her shirt off, tied it around her waist, and continued walking her dogs while nude from the waist up. Local law enforcement considered it to be a violation of Article 233 of the Penal Code, which banned performing an obscene act in a public place. Photos, which were later picked up by international media outlets, would show the topless model being handcuffed by officers. The 37-year-old was taken to the station, where she was given a blouse to cover herself and detained for at least an hour. In the incident's aftermath, she alleged that her rights had been violated during the arrest, as she was handcuffed to a cell railing and repeatedly denied an opportunity to speak to her lawyer. Werner was charged with committing an obscene act for which she risked spending up to a year in jail if found guilty. The model, who also had her own bikini line, subsequently commented on what she'd perceived to be an equality issue and the violation of the country's constitution. Werner argued that equality between men and women was a constitutional stipulation that wasn't applied In practice, as women weren't free to walk shirtless in public, speaking to media outlet G1, Werner noted that she'd traveled all over the world without facing any legal issues for being topless. She stated that her treatment reflected gender conduct dictated by patriarchal, violent culture in relation to the control of female bodies. Number 5. Kevin Hughes. South Carolina man Kevin Hughes was arrested in April of 2014 after Walmart employees in Tega K had spotted him in the store's health and beauty section wearing nothing but a pair of black sneakers. By the time that police arrived at the scene, Hughes had moved on to the electronics section after he was taken into custody. Hughes claimed that the last thing he remembered was being in bed at his sister's home. He claimed that he woke up naked in his truck in the Walmart parking lot and went into the store to buy some clothes. Hughes was charged with disorderly conduct and spent the night in jail. When he was interviewed by a reporter a few days later, he admitted that he'd had a problem with drugs in the past. In spite of suggesting he'd overcome his addiction, Hughes blamed his most recent run-in with the law on the fact that he'd taken methamphetamine, mistakenly believing it was ecstasy. Hughes noted, "It really made me crazy." The man had been nude in public while under the influence of illegal substances in the past. In December of 2012, he ran while only wearing his shoes, besides 2 female joggers. He then knocked on random windows asking for clothes. By the time that the police caught up with him, Hughes was wearing plaid pants with a red sweatshirt and appeared to be under the influence of unknown narcotics. Number 4. Lenisha Henderson. In December of 2023, a Florida woman was arrested for trying to burn down the birth home of Martin Luther King in Atlanta, Georgia. 26-year-old Lenisha Henderson had initially been observed by visitors pouring an unknown liquid on the property, which was a designated historical landmark. 2 Utah tourists asked if she was watering the plants, but upon closer inspection, noticed that Henderson was actually carrying a gas can. Henderson, who was shoeless and clad in all black, ignored pleas from the tourists for her to stop and began pouring the liquid faster on the porch and the outside walls of the home. She then tried to spark a lighter, at which point the 2 Utahans intervened. One of the men, Zach Kempf, later told a local news station that the situation was a little scary for a minute because they didn't know if Henderson had any weapons on her. Multiple surveillance cameras captured the incident. 43-year-old Kempf and other visitors were successful in preventing the fire, and Henderson was immobilized until the arrival of local law enforcement by 2 off-duty NYPD officers who were visiting the area. She was arrested for second-degree attempted arson and interference with government property. The woman was identified as a Navy veteran who'd received medals for good conduct during her service. Henderson's father reported that she'd been missing for 2 days and was experiencing a mental health crisis at the time of her arson attempt. Number 3. Christy Lyn Win. In the fall of 2020, Australian woman Christy Lyn Win was jailed for a total of 12 months at Brisbane's Redcliffe Magistrates Court following a series of crimes and erratic outbursts. On December the 27th of 2019, the court heard that Win was arrested after she was found with a watch and jewelry that had been stolen from a vehicle. When she showed up to court for the charge of receiving tainted property on June the 9th, Win was seen disposing of a needle in a trash bin outside the courthouse. Shortly thereafter, Win lifted her top and flashed a security guard in front of the packed courtroom. She then threw the contents of her handbag on the floor and started yelling profanities. The mother of 5 was charged with public nuisance in connection to that incident. A few weeks later, on June the 25th, she failed to appear in court. 44-year-old Win, who already had a lengthy criminal record, eventually pleaded guilty to failing to dispose of a syringe, public nuisance, failure to appear in court, and receiving tainted property. While convicted of all 4, she was only punished for the former and latter charges, for which she was given custodial sentences of 2 and 10 months, respectively. Upon being handed the sentence, Win had another courtroom outburst in which she broke down in tears and yelled out, "It's not fair!" which prompted her removal by bailiffs. Today's topic was requested by Hangaroog 626. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. The Whistler. In 2012, Maine man Robert Smith got in trouble with Portland police for whistling in the city's downtown. Smith's habit of whistling loudly while wandering the streets had led to him becoming a cult figure in the city. The Whistler, as he was dubbed by locals, appeared in blogs, videos, and local media. Smith's habit, however, was rather polarizing, as some found his whistling to be annoying, unwanted, and a source of ruckus. After a business filed a complaint, Smith received a summons for disorderly conduct in May of 2012, and he was arrested and jailed in July. 32-year-old Smith, however, claimed that he was just trying to make people smile. He reportedly told the police, "You can arrest me 1,000 times, and the day I walk out of this jail, I'll be whistling out the door." Smith added, "God is showing me what I'm doing is okay. He shows me every day with laughter." He ultimately pleaded guilty to the disorderly conduct charge on August the 22nd. A plea agreement was reached with the authorities stipulating that Smith was banned from standing still and whistling. He was told that as long as he kept his whistling mobile, the police wouldn't stop him. We'll line up our release about when being blinded by love goes wrong right after number 1. Stay put if you're in the mood for some more They Will Kill You content. Number 1. Nilsa Anderson. On July the 6th of 2019, a Floribama Shore star was arrested by law enforcement in St. Petersburg, Florida, for disorderly conduct and indecent exposure. As reported by TMZ, Nilsa Anderson, better known by the surname Prowant, was on a balcony and talking to a crowd below. She then encouraged them to sneak a peek as she exposed her breasts. Anderson, who was a regular on the MTV reality series, flashed her body in full view of several police officers. They consequently approached the 25-year-old, but reportedly had no intention of arresting her and told her to clear the area, as she appeared to be severely intoxicated. Law enforcement escorted Anderson to a car that would take her home, at which point she reportedly became belligerent and erratic. After getting in the back seat, she began kicking the rear driver's side window until she shattered it, knocking shards of broken glass into the streets. She was thus arrested and taken to the Pinellas County Jail. Photos of Anderson's arrest later surfaced online. The young woman spent several hours in jail prior to being released on bail. For the indecent exposure charge alone, she faced up to a year in jail and a potential fine of up to $1,000. Mother of 6, Angela Craig from Aurora, Colorado, was declared brain dead and placed on life support before passing away at the UC Health University of Colorado Hospital on March the 18th of 2023. It was the 3rd time that the woman had been hospitalized over the course of 2 weeks. She'd reportedly been complaining of vomiting, excruciating headaches, and dizziness in the days leading up to her death. Doctors couldn't figure out what had happened to Angela. Text messages to James, her husband of 23 years, indicated that the woman felt like she'd been drugged. James didn't allow for her to be given an autopsy in spite of requests from relatives desperate for answers and concerned that the illness might be genetic. He refused, claiming he didn't want doctors poking holes when she was dead. James co-owned the Summerbrook dental practice, and while he'd feigned ignorance about his wife's condition, his colleagues suspected he'd been involved. James had at one point received an Amazon package at the clinic and asked employees not to open it. On March the 13th, an office manager glanced inside and saw potassium cyanide. She searched for the symptoms that consuming it would cause and found they lined up perfectly with Angela's mysterious illness. The police were called after one of James's colleagues told a nurse at the hospital about the cyanide. The dentist failed to provide a clear explanation for why he was in possession of the lethal substance upon being questioned. On March the 16th, at his home, the police found workout-style shakers and 2 Ziploc-style bags with white powdery substances in them. Investigators believed that the dentist had been poisoning Angela's shakes with cyanide, and he was thus arrested on suspicion of murder. It was also discovered that he'd researched how to make poison, what was the fatal arsenic dosage, and whether it was detectable in an autopsy. While Angela was in the hospital, her husband thanked friends and family for their prayers, reportedly stating that it was pretty scary not having answers. A motive for the murder emerged following an examination of James's internet communication. He was having an affair with Karen Kane, a married orthodontist from Austin, Texas, whom he'd met at a conference. He'd sent the woman explicit emails of an intimate nature and was going to fly her into Denver as the mother of his children was dying in the hospital. He'd mentioned the fact that his wife was ill to his mistress. Kane sent him an email claiming that she wanted to be there for him but didn't want to meet his loved ones while pretending to be a friend when there was something more. The email was sent on March the 16th, and Angela was pronounced dead 2 days later. In spite of them having marital problems, Angela never stopped telling James that she loved him, even as he was poisoning her to death. Aside from wanting to start a new life with Kane, who had recently divorced her husband, James's motive may have also been financial. Angela had 3 life insurances, and the dentist was reportedly hiding the fact that they were roughly $2 million in debt. It stemmed from gambling, making poor cryptocurrency investments, falling for a Ponzi scheme, and frequently flying his mistress to Colorado. The case was ongoing as of the latest updates. Number 16. Sha Armstead. On May the 8th of 2022, veteran NYPD officer Sha Armstead was supposed to work a shift in the Bronx but called in sick. The 36-year-old had spent the day tailing his wife, Alexandra Van der Hayden, aged 35, whom he suspected of cheating on him. She and her lover, 20-year-old Edward Wilkins, drove separately to a meeting spot at La Quinta Inn in Wallkill. Wilkins worked for Van der Hayden's dog walking business, and it wasn't immediately clear for how long they'd been having an affair. After spending a few hours at the hotel, they drove out and had dinner at a Golden Corral restaurant before heading to a Dave & Buster's. The entire time, Armstead was following them, and it was suspected that he'd planted a tracking device on his wife's car. Armstead was due to start his shift at midnight, and Van der Hayden reportedly figured it was safe for Wilkins to drop her off back at her car shortly before 11 p.m. They started driving to the hotel for another rendezvous in separate vehicles. Armstead then chased after his love rival on the NY211. The off-duty officer rammed his car into Wilkins's, sending it spinning out of control. Both vehicles then came to a halt, facing east in the roadway's westbound lanes. Wilkins jumped out and started running, reaching the parking lot of a Buffalo Wild Wings. Armstead fired a volley of 16 shots towards his love rival, with 11 bullets impacting him. Some of the shots struck Wilkins in the back of the head, killing him in the immediate aftermath. Armstead was found dead from a gunshot wound as well. Updates from January of 2023 indicated that Wilkins' mother had sued the NYPD, accusing them of negligence for allowing Armstead to be in possession of his service weapon even though he'd called in sick. The suit also alleged that the shooter suffered from mental health issues and was therefore psychologically and emotionally unfit to be a police officer and to carry a firearm. Number 15. Nancy Gonzalez. New York City man Ronell Wilson was taken into custody after killing officers James Namorin and Rodney Andrews during a gun sting gone wrong in Staten Island in 2003. The undercover officers were shot in the back of the head, execution style, and Wilson was sentenced to death in 2007. The case was eventually thrown out on a legal technicality during a subsequent appeal, but Wilson was retried. In the months leading up to the second trial, Wilson was incarcerated at the Metropolitan Detention Center, a federal jail in Brooklyn. Nancy Gonzalez was a night guard at the prison tasked with supervising him. During that time, the pair began having relations. Inmates reported to have seen them flirting and spending a lot of time together. One inmate testified that he'd spotted the guard standing near Wilson's cell. The witness noted that the latter's pants were down around his ankles when Gonzalez moved away. The illicit relationship reportedly gave Wilson power and leverage over other inmates. He and Gonzalez had relations in an activity room at the detention center and conceived a son, Justice, who was born on March the 21st of 2013. The guard later admitted that she'd been trying to get pregnant, which was interpreted as her last-ditch effort to help Wilson with his case. Once the affair was discovered by officials, 29-year-old Gonzalez was arrested. She pleaded guilty to abusing a person in custody in early July of 2013 and was released on bail while awaiting her sentencing. She refused to testify at Wilson's upcoming hearings before he was given the capital punishment for the second time later that month. While out on bail and awaiting her own sentencing, Gonzalez was prohibited from consuming alcohol or drugs due to her history of substance abuse. Gonzalez met with Wilson's family twice in the summer of 2013 after the cop killer had been sentenced. The disgraced guard would claim that his relatives subtly blamed her for him getting the second death sentence and that they plied her with alcohol. Her drinking was discovered by law enforcement. In November of 2013, Gonzalez admitted in Suffolk County Family Court that she'd been with her child while intoxicated and temporarily lost custody of Justice, who was placed in the care of her maternal aunt. In February of 2014, Gonzalez was sentenced for her illicit affair with Wilson. Her defense asked for leniency, highlighting her nightmarish upbringing during which she'd been abused by multiple male family members, affecting the relationships she'd formed later on as an adult. As a further indication of emotional instability, her defense pointed to the fact that she'd had at least 8 intimate partners, men and women, during her 2 years working at the detention center. She was ultimately jailed for 1 year and 1 day. Number 14. Jesse Dobs. On the morning of November the 6th of 2016, the bodies of 37-year-old Cynthia Morris and teenager Brianna Pavlicek were found at the former's home in Baytown, Texas. Both victims had been fatally shot, but the circumstances of the double murder remained unclear. Kirsten Fritsch, Morris's teenage daughter, and Pavlicek's older sister was missing from the home, as was her 2008 PT Cruiser. An Amber Alert was issued for the teen. Later in the day, the police found Jesse Dobs, Fritsch's boyfriend, at a bar in Texas City outside Galveston. He'd reportedly walked in the establishment barefoot, asking for a glass of water. The 21-year-old had also called his ex-girlfriend, who was the mother of his 2 children, asking to see the kids one last time. Fritsch's car was in the bar's parking lot, but there was no sign of her. Dobbs was uncooperative upon being approached by law enforcement, and he was charged with resisting arrest. Following a search lasting 2 days, Texas EquiSearch volunteers discovered Fritsch's body in a wooded area north of the bar where Dobbs had been arrested and about 25 miles from where her mother and sister had been killed. Her body was in a state of decomposition, but it was determined she'd suffered at least 60 stab wounds. Dobbs' initial charge was changed to first-degree murder. Charging documents indicated that the man confessed to killing his girlfriend, but that his grip on reality was questionable. He was quoted as saying, "Kirsten is dead, I killed her. Not the real Kirsten, but the fake Kirsten." In an odd letter he sent to the court, the man claimed that he was falsely accused, as he knew for a fact Fritsch wasn't dead. His lawyer stated that he was suffering from delusional episodes. In 2018, Dobbs admitted in court that he'd killed Fritsch, but tried to argue that his crime had been one of sudden passion, which would have capped his sentence at 20 years. He claimed that he'd lost control and relentlessly stabbed Fritsch during an argument about Morris and Pavlicek's murders. The man claimed that Fritsch had called him an abuser and tried to pin the murder of her family members on him when she'd actually shot them. During sentencing, prosecutors argued that Dobbs had not only killed his girlfriend, but was also the primary suspect in the shooting deaths of her mother and sister, an aspect confirmed by Baytown police. Dobbs had started dating Fritsch online and had moved into her family's home a few weeks before the incident. According to Fritsch's grandmother, he seemed like a lowlife, and Morris wanted him gone. Dobbs' sudden passion claim was rejected, and he was sentenced to 45 years in prison for killing Fritsch. As of 2018, no one was charged for the deaths of Morris and Pavlicek. Should the culprit be established as Dobbs, he'd face capital punishment. Number 13. Robert Hall. Emmett Corrigan and Ashley Burke met in 2003 while they were attending Utah State University and got married in March of the following year. The couple had 5 children and settled in Meridian, Idaho. Emmett went on to start a law practice while Ashley became a stay-at-home mother. In late 2010, Emmett hired a 40-year-old paralegal named Candy to work at his practice. The woman was married to Robert Hall, with whom she had 2 children. Emmett and Candy started having an affair, and by 2011, Ashley had noticed that her husband was becoming distant, but only suspected he'd started seeing someone else. On March the 11th, the couple argued about their marital issues and Emmett stormed out, heading to a local pharmacy where he met Candy. She later reported that he'd gotten into her lover's truck and that they drove around before having intercourse in the vehicle. Candy's daughter then noticed that her mother's car was parked at the pharmacy and told Robert. He called Candy and, as per her version of events, ended up speaking with Emmett and argued over the phone. After 10 p.m., Robert went to the pharmacy and a physical altercation with Emmett ensued. Candy, the only other person present when the fight unfolded, stated that Emmett had incited her husband to fight him. She claimed to have turned around towards her car, at which point she heard 3 gunshots ring out. Emmett suffered fatal injuries while Robert had a grazing bullet wound to his head. Robert was arrested and during the trial that followed, claimed that he'd acted in self-defense, but the prosecution argued he'd waited for the couple and then shot Emmett in cold blood for having an affair with his wife. In October of 2012, he was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison, with a minimum of 17 years served before he'd be eligible for parole. With her suspicions on the affair confirmed in the shooting's aftermath, Ashley spoke about her late husband, stating, "I begged him to stay home and fight for me, but instead he died fighting for someone else's wife." Number 12. Adolf Sonny Neal. 69-year-old Donald William Shedd was found dead by a family member at a home in Dalton, Georgia, on May the 24th of 2012. The authorities were called to the address where they also discovered the lifeless body of the man's granddaughter, 27-year-old Jessica Neal, in the pool house. She'd been stabbed multiple times while Shedd had been left unrecognizable after being beaten to death. He'd been living with Jessica and her husband, Adolf Sonny Neal, who became the prime suspect in the double murder. A manhunt was launched for him in the incident's wake. Sonny and Jessica worked together at the Dalton tanning salon, Dazzle, which they co-owned. By multiple accounts, the former was jealous, controlling, and obsessive in his relationship with Jessica, who was 22 years younger than him. The night before she was killed, Jessica had messaged her father to say that all hell is breaking loose, but claimed that she had a handle on the situation. While the authorities were searching for the suspect, a woman recognized Sonny upon seeing him walking along Highway 201 in Varnell. He took off running but was later found in the woods, 12 miles away from his home, where he'd been hiding since the murders. He was taken into custody without incident. As investigators delved deeper into the couple's lives, it emerged that their seemingly perfect marriage had all but disintegrated. They'd been seeing other people and had been on the verge of divorce for months. A close friend of Jessica's claimed that the woman was taunting her husband with the fact that she'd started a new relationship and was determined to divorce him. It was thus suspected that Sonny had killed her and her grandfather in a fit of jealous and possessive rage. The incident was described as one of the goriest to have ever taken place in Whitfield County. Sonny eventually pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and was sentenced to life without parole. Number 11. Taquan Long. By January of 2016, New York City woman Joanne Gravett, aged 36, had obtained a protection order against her boyfriend, Taquan Long. Their relationship was reported to have broken down after the latter had started abusing drugs. In September of the previous year, Long was arrested on suspicion of assault, petty larceny, and harassment after he'd reportedly thrown a sneaker at Gravett and struck her with a lamp. On January the 17th, the woman told 29-year-old Long to stay away from her, to which he replied, "I'd rather be dead or make peace with God in jail." A little over a week later, Gravett would be dead. Surveillance footage showed Long storming into his ex's apartment in Far Rockaway, Queens, on January the 27th of 2016. He re-emerged within minutes with what appeared to be a gun, and a neighbor later reported that they'd heard commotion, with the noise culminating in a loud boomed. Long had become obsessed with the idea that Gravett was seeing a man from her apartment building. She was subsequently found lying face down on the floor of her apartment with multiple gunshot injuries. Gravett passed away at St. John's Hospital a few hours later. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, Long went down to the lobby where he encountered 51-year-old Barbara Romano, the mother of the man whom he suspected Gravett had been dating. Long told Romano that her son was playing games before he opened fire on her, releasing 3 to 4 shots. Romano dove behind the security desk and crawled to the boiler room from where she called the police. She suffered a gunshot injury to her hand but was taken to a local hospital and recovered. Long fled to California, and in March of 2016, he was tracked down by the Regional Fugitive Task Force and arrested at the Sacramento home of the mother of his child. He faced a slew of charges that included second-degree murder, attempted murder, and assault with intent to cause serious injury with a weapon. In the spring of 2018, he was sentenced to 45 years to life in prison, which meant that he'd likely die behind bars. Number 10. Sincere Brown. Leading up to early September of 2018, teenager India Chapman from DeKalb County, Georgia, had started dating again, following her breakup with 18-year-old Sincere Brown. The pair had met at North Atlanta High School in the spring of 2017 and became romantically involved by the summer. Brown grew possessive and controlling in the relationship. He displayed erratic behavior, characterized by frequent angry outbursts followed by him immediately apologizing. Chapman eventually broke up with him, but they reportedly remained friends. Unable to move on in the separation's wake, Brown became enraged upon realizing that Chapman had started seeing someone else. Speaking of Brown's attitude towards that development, Chapman's grandmother would later state that if he couldn't have her, no one could. In early September of 2018, Brown lured his ex to his grandfather's home on Biffle Road in Stone Mountain. Brown knifed the teenager at least 8 times, killing her. He then wrapped the body in a comforter and hid it in a shed in the Stone Mountain home, where it was eventually found by another of his relatives. Brown was arrested on charges of murder and concealing the death of another, with local law enforcement describing the killing of Chapman as a crime of passion. Number 9. Camille Rosek. Camille Rosek was jailed for life in the fall of 2022 after he was found guilty of the brutal murder of his girlfriend, 27-year-old Iona Golabek, who was also the mother of his child. Lincoln Crown Court was told that Rosek had attacked the woman on November the 9th of 2021 at the apartment they shared in Boston, Lincolnshire. Golabek was reported to have wanted the relationship to end and had given Rosek 2 weeks to move out. The latter then found out that his girlfriend had contacted other men on Tinder and had made plans to meet one of them for drinks. In a fit of jealous rage, he struck her at least 7 times in the head with a hammer as their young child slept. Golabek suffered fatal skull fractures and brain injuries. Rosek then used the butchery skills he'd acquired as a chicken factory worker to disarticulate her body with a knife. He cut the woman up into 15 pieces, of which he disposed of at Witham Way Country Park. Rosek subsequently contacted Golabek's friends to make it seem like he was trying to find her before he eventually reported her missing to local police. As part of the investigation, law enforcement searched the couple's home where they discovered jars containing fabric, which appeared to be tinged with blood, hidden in a cupboard. By that point, Golabek's body hadn't been found. The missing persons cases became a murder investigation with Rosek as the primary suspect. He was arrested on November the 20th and officially charged following the discovery of Golabek's remains in the park. A few months later, Rosek denied murder during his trial, but a jury found him guilty after 3 days of deliberations. He was given a life sentence with a minimum of 22 years served. Number 8. James Perello. On December the 3rd of 2013, New Hampshire man James Perello pleaded guilty in Sullivan County Superior Court to the second-degree murder of his wife, 42-year-old Natalie. The woman was shot multiple times at their Grantham home on April the 26th of 2012. Natalie, a mother of 4, was a popular teacher at Lebanon High School who'd recently been among the finalists for the state's Teacher of the Year award. She and James had been having marital problems for several years, and their situation aggravated following the birth of their fourth child. They spent several months apart but then decided to continue living together, albeit in separate bedrooms, while working through their issues. Leading up to the spring of 2012, James had begun to suspect his wife had started seeing someone else. He spoke with co-workers at a construction site about the matter and reportedly claimed he ought to just kill her. James had begun to secretly record his wife at their home, which was how he eventually discovered that Natalie was involved in an intimate relationship with a former student who was 20 years old at the time. On April the 26th, James flew into a fit of rage while confronting her about the recording. James would later tell the court that he'd gone into the bedroom armed with the pistol because he wanted to scare Natalie. He claimed that he accidentally discharged the weapon after she reached for it. James then consecutively shot her 6 times in the head. One of the bullets lodged in a window frame above the spot where their youngest child slept. James admitted to the murder and had no visible reaction when he was subsequently sentenced to the maximum of 35 years to life in prison. Number 7. Giselle Esteban. On May the 27th of 2011, nursing student Michelle Lee disappeared from the Kaiser Permanente Medical Center in Hayward, California. The 26-year-old never returned from a break during her shift after a 4-month search. The woman's body was found in a canyon between Pleasanton and Sunol. The primary suspect in her killing was subsequently identified as Giselle Esteban, who'd once been Lee's best friend. They'd attended the same high school in San Diego before they both moved to the Bay Area. Their friendship soured when Esteban began dating Scott Marasigan, who would become the father of her child, and after she'd learned that he'd previously dated Lee. Marasigan maintained that he and the latter were never intimate and that they were just friends. Esteban had nevertheless started to grow jealous since 2005, when she found that Lee had texted Marasigan that she was pregnant and wanted to get an abortion. She regarded the message as proof that they'd been together. Esteban and Marasigan's relationship gradually broke down, fueled by the former's jealousy. In late February of 2011, she started sending her ex texts that grew increasingly antagonistic. She accused the man of choosing Lee over her family and threatened them both that they would pay for their mistake. On March the 2nd, one of the texts read that Lee had dug her own grave by being a home wrecker. On May the 29th, 2 days after Lee had gone missing, a final text from Esteban to Marasigan read, "Where's Michelle?" She became a person of interest in early June of 2011. CCTV showed her at the scene before and after Lee's disappearance. When law enforcement searched her SUV and Union City apartment, they found traces of Lee's blood. Evidence indicated that Esteban had made calls to try and learn the aspiring nurse's schedule and had searched for her home address on the internet. Moreover, signals from Esteban and Lee's phones were picked up in the same area around the time of the incident. Esteban was arrested on suspicion of murder, and a judge would later claim he had never seen a case with more compelling circumstantial evidence pointing straight at the killer. Esteban's defense ultimately acknowledged that Esteban had killed Lee, but argued for a verdict of voluntary manslaughter, stating that the defendant had been provoked by the victim and committed the killing in the heat of passion. The 28-year-old, who showed no remorse nor testified during her 3-week trial, was ultimately sentenced to 25 years to life in prison in December of 2012. Number 6. James McDonald. Sophie and James McDonald, a couple from Dawlish, England, met when they were in their 20s. They had 3 children during a marriage lasting roughly 16 years, up to their breakup in May of 2014. There were several factors behind their decision to separate, including their financial situation and the fact that Sophie had reportedly cheated on her husband multiple times. James moved into a nearby apartment, and in January of 2015, Sophie went to his address to discuss their divorce. She'd texted her mother beforehand to say that she felt wobbly about meeting him. 36-year-old Sophie failed to pick up her boys from school, and her mother reported her missing in the aftermath. James told law enforcement that he had no idea what had happened to his estranged wife after she'd left his home before he joined in the effort to find her. He even sent texts to the woman's phone inquiring about her whereabouts. Law enforcement would eventually uncover that James had brutally murdered Sophie and then hid her body. They'd reportedly argued at his apartment over the terms of the divorce, and the man attacked her. James beat her about the head and body, pulled out clumps of her hair, and stomped on her face before strangling her to death with an electric cord. He then wrapped her body in a duvet and multiple layers of plastic. James took the body down to a communal trash storage room and hid it among bin bags before he went to pick up his and Sophie's 2 young boys from primary school. He played along with the missing persons case when police came to his home to ask about the woman. James admitted that he'd killed his wife but denied murder during the early stage of his trial. He claimed to have lost control because she'd threatened to bankrupt him and forbid him from seeing his children. He also claimed that Sophie had had over 100 secret lovers during their marriage. On the 6th day of his trial, James changed his plea and admitted murdering his wife. He was jailed for life with a minimum of 17 and a half years served. Number 5. Christopher Charles Kanani. Christopher Charles Kanani and Natalie Lieni, a couple from Queensland, Australia, had been dating for 6 months leading up to March of 2013. Lieni had confided in others that she was going to break up with Kanani. A verbal altercation erupted between them on March the 10th at the residence in Rochdale South, during the course of which Kanani locked his girlfriend in the apartment. Later on, the police were called to the address where they found 26-year-old Lieni dead. She was slumped against the wall with a shotgun wound to her temple, while Kanani was in a state of distress as he was crying while curled up on the floor. Lieni succumbed to the wound in a hospital a short time later. Kanani told officers that his girlfriend had been shot by burglars, but was charged with her murder within days. The man entered a guilty plea to manslaughter at Brisbane Supreme Court. He claimed that he never meant to kill his girlfriend and that his shotgun had discharged by accident. Crown Prosecutor Dennis Kinsella didn't accept the manslaughter plea, arguing that Kanani had intended to shoot Lieni, characterizing the incident as a crime of passion. Kinsella noted that there was no denying Kanani had loved his girlfriend, but added that the problem was he loved her so much that not only did he take a loaded shotgun and point it at her head, he then shot her in the head. Kanani was jailed for life after he was found guilty of murder and unsuccessfully appealed the sentence. He then took the matter to the High Court, where it was determined in August of 2017 that his case warranted a retrial. Kanani yet again admitted manslaughter, urging the panel to acknowledge that the shotgun had a faulty mechanism. It only took a jury 2 hours to find him guilty of murder, and he was given a life sentence for the second time in early 2018. Number 4. Shab Ahmed. On February the 17th of 2017, Kondkar Faria Elahai wrote in her diary, "If I die in 2017, that cannot be a natural death. Please investigate my death." The following day, she was gruesomely murdered by her husband, Shab Ahmed, at their home in Parramatta, Western Sydney, Australia. For nearly 2 years, Elahai had been having an affair with Omar Khan, a close friend of her husband's. Ahmed had become aware of her infidelity. Khan would later admit to the extramarital relationship in court and stated that in September of 2016, he'd received a call from Ahmed telling him, "I hope you're happy. You can come over. I am leaving home." Ahmed and Elahai separated for a few months but then got back together after the latter had told him that she'd ended things with Khan. On February the 18th of 2017, Ahmed demanded to see his wife's phone and found recent messages of an intimate nature from her lover. He dragged the 19-year-old around their home and reached for a knife in the kitchen. Ahmed stabbed Elahai in the face repeatedly with such force that he broke the tip of the knife in her teeth. He went on to deliver over a dozen knife strikes. He smoked several cigarettes and watched the woman as she took her last breath while lying on a blood-soaked mattress. Ahmed changed his Facebook status to "The End" and called the emergency services. He calmly told the operator that he'd killed his wife and that an ambulance was not needed. He was arrested, but denied murder during a subsequent trial, claiming he'd suffered an abnormality of the mind stemming from depression. However, the prosecution would argue that Ahmed hadn't acted in the heat of the moment, but had turned his mind to punishing his wife. His internet searches indicated that he'd looked up punishments for adultery under Islamic law prior to the attack. He was found guilty of murder and jailed for 27 years with a non-parole period of 20 years and 3 months. Number 3. Philip Dafter. Philip Dafter and his future wife Diana were both born in Malawi, and after finishing their studies moved to the UK, where they met and got married. By the fall of 2022, the once promising relationship had all but disintegrated, and the couple were on the brink of divorce. On the morning of October the 7th, Diana was seen on CCTV leaving and then returning to their Northampton apartment. The 36-year-old was never seen alive again. An argument with Philip about their car getting a maintenance checkup boiled over into a row about the man's previous infidelities and a recent incident in which he'd messaged a younger woman from Malawi. The fight culminated with Philip grabbing a knife and stabbing his wife so hard that the blade broke off from the handle. Multiple cuts on Diana's fingers suggested that she tried to defend herself by putting her hands in front of the blade. She died after one of the knife strikes had pierced her heart. Philip, a former soldier in the British Army, then boarded a train to London and reportedly told the conductor he was a bad and evil man. During the train ride, he sent a WhatsApp group message that read, "Going to jail. I have killed Diana Dafter today." He was arrested at London's Euston Station and confessed the killing to British Transport Police officers before the body was found at their home. Following his arrest and during the ensuing trial, Philip admitted manslaughter but denied murder, claiming he'd killed his wife in a moment of madness. His plea was, however, rejected, and he was found guilty of murder, with his sentencing scheduled for the second half of May 2023. Number 2. James Bland. In March of 2015, UK man James Bland was jailed for 6 years for killing his wife after claiming she'd humiliated and bullied him during their marriage. In August of 2014, Carol Bland had returned to their home in Radcliffe, near Manchester, after she'd attended a rock concert with her boyfriend. An argument erupted, during the course of which James repeatedly stabbed his 62-year-old wife in the stomach as she was getting ready for bed. When police and paramedics arrived at their semi-detached house, they found the woman dead and James with critical knife wounds to his throat. Medics were able to save the man, who was subsequently charged with his wife's killing. He would later tell officers that he'd stabbed Carol because she wanted to continue living with him while also having a boyfriend. James claimed that the woman didn't want to move nor let him sell the house, adding, "She was rubbing my face in it." The couple, who'd been married for roughly 4 decades, had been having relationship problems since at least 2013. Carol started going out alone and eventually met a man at a local social club. They went to the concert together and made plans to rendezvous again at noon the following day. Her lover called the police when she'd failed to show up for their date, and he'd visited her home to find that the curtains were still up. Bland was ultimately found guilty of manslaughter after stating in court that prior to stabbing Carol, he'd heard voices in his head repeatedly saying, "Shut her up." Number 1. Shamuel Levine. On October the 26th of 2020, violence erupted in an apartment on Ocean Promenade in Rockaway Park, New York City, during an argument between 34-year-old Shamuel Levine and his girlfriend, Danielle Morano, aged 37. A neighbor reported that he'd heard a scuffle below his window. He went down to the laundry room, at which point he saw Levine coming out of the elevator. He was reportedly wearing a backpack and had a stressed look on his face. The neighbor asked if he and Morano were rearranging furniture, to which Levine replied, "I can't talk to you right now, I'm in a hurry." A short while later, the neighbor saw that ambulance workers were doing CPR on a woman outside. He recognized her as Morano, who had blood coming out of her head after she'd impacted the ground several floors down from hers. Surveillance footage showed Levine coming outside in the incident's wake. He touched his girlfriend's arm and then her forehead before calling the emergency services. She was pronounced dead at Jamaica Hospital about 6 hours later. Levine was arrested in the incident's wake. As indicated by a criminal complaint, he'd accused his partner of cheating on him and asked to see her cell phone, which she refused. He admitted that he'd put her in a chokehold while trying to forcefully grab the phone. The man denied killing her, but the evidence indicated that he'd viciously beat Morano before throwing her out of the window. At the couple's home, the police found clumps of hair matching Morano's, as well as a large dent in the apartment wall and a hole in the window screen. Moreover, at least 2 of the skull fractures she'd suffered weren't consistent with a mere fall. A Queens County grand jury indicted Levine on a second-degree murder charge, and if found guilty, he faced 25 years to life in prison. Thanks for watching. Would you rather burst into song whenever you're angry, or do 20 squats before every meal? Let us know in the comments section below.